It's a bit like taking off a rocket, isn't it? Between
it is. There's a countdown. I feel like I work in NASA. Yeah.
Yes. Every time I'm recording a podcast, whether it's for the astrology podcast that I'm on with Chris and Austin, or whether it's the Water Trio podcast that I do with my great girlfriends and astrologers, Alicia and Cassandra, there's always so many checks, this sound, this recording, this test. So it's very much like taking off something.
That's right under your card, right there.
I'm getting a little feedback from Tony
that's
here.
Solar Fire.
I'm opening Solar Fire.
Okay.
Just click pause right there.
So I have a bit of an Aries problem.
And then
being an Aries sun, I tend to do things
you're good.
a little too soon. Which one do you want?
Zoom.
Speedy Gonzalez. We like it.
Or whatever that.
Oh, some beautiful comments from people. Thanks, Leslie. Yes, I did just announce that my husband and I are moving to Europe.
My computer teacher used to call it clicking like crazy. So she would say, she would tell us, give us the instructions, and then she'd say, okay, no clicking like crazy, because you have to wait till you hear the whole instruction.
I do it too. And my husband's like, clicking does not make it happen faster. It will actually slow the machine down.
I hear that too. I was driving the other day and I saw a pedestrian at the stop walk signal pushing it over and over and over. And I had a moment of camaraderie with that person, but
yes,
it just, and I also wonder though, it's not gonna make it faster.
It unfortunately it doesn't. And then hi Julie, thanks. I feel like I've been everywhere lately, so that's great that you've been coming along for the ride.
And to those of you that are just joining us, it's been announced here in the chat window, and Kelly announced it yesterday, that she is moving to
Belgium in Europe. Super exciting. Bit of a whirlwind. I'd written about it on my blog a couple of months ago, just some Uranus transits coming through for my husband and I. So we are, it's not permanent. My husband's got a 2-year posting there. So we're keeping our house here in Canada, and we'll see what happens. I don't know. I mean, Uranus, right? It's like, we'll go, all I know for sure is he's got 2 years and we'll be there, and I don't know what happens after. So we'll see.
Well, good for you for jumping in with the winds of Uranus at your back.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. It's kind of the only way to go. We're actually moving to a town called Mons in Belgium. So it's about an hour outside of Brussels itself, just on the train. So, yeah.
Oh, LaDonna, you bring up a good point of Kelly on the Astrology podcast with Chris Brennan and Austin Kopic. LaDonna says she loves how the energy is between all three of you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's one of those weird things that you couldn't have tried to create. It just worked from the get-go. So yeah, I love Austin and Chris. That's a great joy for me each month to be able to talk with them, which is great.
Yes, and Kathy brings up the Water Trio as well.
Yes, I know. Because I really can't get enough of talking, I started another podcast with 2 girlfriends late last year, and it's a little different format. We just do a quick 30-minute show, but we do it each week. And the 3 of us are all Australian. So we have a little bit of Aussie humor. We talk about astrology. We talk about, life and all the things. So
you're quite busy, Kelly.
Look, I do like to keep busy, but that could be a Jupiter problem. So definitely all the water, very welcome here. You can come and have a cry or a wine with us anytime.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Well, so happy that you could make time in your busy life and schedule to be here with us today, Kelly.
Oh my gosh,
it's such a treat for all the viewers. The people that haven't seen you present before are in for a real treat today.
Thank you so much, Alex.
And we're just waiting a couple minutes just for those people that like to log in right at 3, those people that aren't Aries at all.
The last minutes. The last minute. Yes.
Which I can appreciate. It literally starts at 3 Pacific time, so.
That's true. Hey, Wendy, she is not far from me. Yeah, sometimes I find with a lot of fire, they're late, not because they were just slothing around the house, but because they thought, I've got an extra 5 minutes. I can squeeze in this extra thing before I get there. And Alex, I feel like you can relate to this.
Yes. It's so true.
Whereas, the Capricorn Saturn types are sometimes so worried about being late that they show up 10 or 15. They'll be like, no, I can't be late, so I won't do that extra thing. I'll just be there.
Right. It's funny that you bring that up, though, because I was the first person outside the juice shop this morning waiting at the door.
Oh my God, I love it. Well, you knew you had a big day, right? You needed fuel.
I did. And I got really competitive in the parking lot because other people started to get out of their cars, and I thought, well, I have to let them know I was here first.
Of course. I love it. That's fantastic.
I'm going to go ahead and start the recording here, and we'll see what Kelly has in store for us today. Hello and welcome everyone to 2020 Epic Cycles for Change and Renewal. My name is Alex Garrett, and I'm joining you here from Astrology University. Today we have Kelly Surtees joining us live just outside of Toronto, Canada, here to share with us. We're pretty short on time today. It was just an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly hand this over to Kelly.
Thanks so much, Alex. It is a shorter length presentation than normal, so I'm going to have to try and keep myself concise to share as much as I can with you all as we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my presentation up and running. So hopefully that's clear on the screen now. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the collective shift that's coming up, moving from the element of Earth, or a long cycle that's been defined by the Earth qualities, into another long cycle, but this one defined by the air qualities, if you like. So let's dive in without further ado, because as Alex said, we are on the clock. So Earth to Air, beyond 2020. What I'm referencing today, just for those of you who may not be familiar with this or may be confused about what's actually happening, Jupiter and Saturn meet in the sky every 20 years. And when I say meet, I mean they form a conjunction. So Jupiter and Saturn join up at the same degree in the same sign of the zodiac every 20 years. Now, this particular cycle has been tracked by astrologers for more than 1,000 years because there's this weird little thing that happens with these Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions where for a long period of time, approximately 200 years, those Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions happen in signs of the same element. So that means that for the last couple of hundred years, every time Jupiter and Saturn have met each other in the sky, when their cycles have joined up, they have met in Taurus, or then they met in Virgo, and then they met in Capricorn, and then in Taurus, and then in Virgo, and then in Capricorn. So we have this sort of repetition of theme, if you like, coming through. So the conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn collectively describe these longer cycles, and every couple of hundred years there's a great conjunction or a mutation where the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions start to happen in signs of a different element. And that's part of what makes the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in December of 2020 so special, is that we will be permanently and properly shifting into our great conjunctions in the element, the signs of the air element. So I'm going to give you a little bit more info here just to kind of flesh this out. Going back as far as sort of 1842, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions started to happen in the earth signs. Then right up until 1961, so from 1842 to 1961, every time Jupiter and Saturn made a conjunction in the sky, it was in one or another of the earth signs. In 1981, they dipped into the sign of Libra. So in 1981, we had an air element conjunction, which is the first, but we're sort of in the transition period here, because then in 2000, when Jupiter and Saturn made their conjunction, that was in the sign Taurus. So the last couple of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions have been trading signs of different elements. And this happens fairly regularly as part of the transition period. So we did have a taste of what's to come back in 1981 when Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct in an air sign. But So 1981 and then December of 2020, and every Jupiter and Saturn conjunction going forward now from December of 2020 right through until October of 2219. So I don't even know how you say that, 2219. I'm just going to go with that. All the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions are going to be in air signs. The first one, of course, will be in Aquarius, 0 Aquarius. It'll be 21st of December, Eastern Standard Time. So it could be late on the 21st or even the morning of the 22nd, just depending on whereabouts you are in the world. So that's kind of the cycle I'm referencing here. And a little bit of what I wanted to do was just speak briefly to the last time, or the last couple of times, we've had these air element periods with Jupiter and Saturn. So I've actually gone all data nerd on prep for this, and I've got Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions kind of highlighted for every 1,000 years going back in time. That's actually, this is the cycle starting now, going forward. This is starting in 0014. You can see that it's color coded. So we had some red for fire, a little bit of a blue for water, a little bit more higgledy-piggledy in this early period. We settled into a few water ones, and then we transitioned into some air, because the second last time, if you like, we had these air conjunctions. They occurred loosely from 332 to 551 CE, which is the Common Era and the new way of referencing what we used to say AD. So if we have a quick think about what happened collectively and socially between 330 and 550 CE, we did have the fall of Rome. So we had this kind of destabilization and decentralization of power. We did have the Visigoths and the Huns kind of sweeping in and taking over. So there was a lot more movement, a lot more change in terms of who was in charge, where and when, and sort of speaking a little bit here to sort of European history. And of course, we would see references to this in the East if we dived into the history there as well. Some of the other things that happened in that time is, we had borders that were pierced and became more mobile, or people were fighting wars about where the territory was going to be. So there was a lot more of this amorphous type energies. And essentially that period, there was a lot of empires, if you like, breaking apart in various parts of Europe, basically. So that's cluing us into this idea of movement and decentralization. Basically what sort of happened is power was dispersed out of the main cities, if you like, and into these smaller tribes. So we might think about that as the loss of centralized power in Europe in that 330 to 550 period. Then we scooch forward, because the other way these cycles work is you might hear reference to this sort of once in 800 year cycle. And what that basically means is that it takes 800 years from when we go through an elemental period of one kind before we get back to it. So it's approximately 200 years per element, which means it's about 800 years from the start of, say, the last air elemental period to when we get to that again now. So the most recent air elemental period happened between 1186 and 1405. So relatively recently, if you like, just compared to what else we've been looking at. And we had, similar to what we've got now, we had a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in Libra in November of 1186. Then we scooched back into an Earth conjunction in April of 1206. Then in March of 1226, we settled into our air conjunctions, and they ran right through till 1405. So that period's really interesting. We do have, maybe more detailed records of that time, just because it is a little bit more, close to where we are now. That period was really interesting because certainly in Europe, when I was doing my research for this, I was really excited to hear that one of the things that had a bit of a revival in that time frame was actually astrology. So that was due to some translation works that were going on in the late 12th century and then into the 13th century. So the late 1100s and all throughout the 1200s. This is sort of the precursor to the artistic renaissance that happened in Italy. That was more to do once we'd moved into the water elemental period. But the ideas that kind of prompted that began in this air element period. So we had a little bit of a revival of astrology, which we're already starting to see now. So I have high hopes for how our great craft can continue to blossom once we get beyond December of 2020. But we also had things like the Crusades. So again, we have this movement of larger groups of peoples and populations. We have our windmill technology begins to be a little bit more developed and a little bit more accessible. And paper manufacturing was something that became a real focus during that period. And I know to our modern minds, paper seems like a little bit of an old school thing, but the development, and now we had paper before, 1185, if you like. Paper manufacturing kind of really took off, if you like, in Italy in about 1270. And paper existed before then, but it became a little bit, the technologies, if you like, that they were using to create and produce paper became a little bit more refined, and they were able to produce it faster and a little bit more cheaply, which made it a little bit more accessible. And you can imagine if paper becomes more available, we're going to be able to put things on that paper, and we're going to be able to get ideas and information spread more widely. Because paper is obviously more mobile instead of things like tablet, stone, silk. Even in China, they were using silk to actually write things on, but that was incredibly expensive. So that's something else that was happening. So new technologies were sort of being developed. Even there was a specific type of rudder on ships that was refined at that point, which helped speed up movement and transport. The university system basically exploded in this last air period. There had been just a couple of universities in Europe prior to going into this air element period. But once we were properly in this air element period, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. We had about 14 universities prop up all through Western Europe at that time. Universities are hugely significant in the development of the human collective in that they consolidated knowledge and they made it more of a structured experience for people to come and learn and develop their own wisdom. So it kind of is a no-brainer for us as astrologers to think, well, that makes sense. The last time we were in an air period, we had these centers of learning flourish in the Western world. So the one, if you like, big negative that happened in this period, the last air period, which I think still speaks to the qualities of the air element, is that we did have the Black Plague or the Black Death happen in that time frame. I know. So that was sort of mid 14th century, so smack bang in the middle of the air period. And, if you think about air in terms of disease, it would represent things that spread quickly and spread easily, because one of the things about the qualities of air is that it has this dispersing, so it can kind of go wide, it can go far, and it can go pretty fast, literally like an idea speeds through thought. So it's not that I want to, make people all get depressed and things like that, but it's not all positives, if you like. So we've got to keep those things in mind as we think about the future.
Kelly, on that note, Vanessa has an interesting question. Would you connect this to 5G technology as well?
100%. Now, I'm not super well versed in the intricacies of 5G technology, but anything that is allowing ideas and information to move faster around the world is absolutely going to be part of this. Now, if you think about this too, we had a taste of the air quality between 1981 and 2000, because remember in 1981, we did have a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in an air sign. Think about what happened technologically between 1981 and 2000. The modern computer, the personal computer, it wasn't developed. Computer technology goes all the way back to World War II, but it became more easily and affordably developed, so that computers went from being something that big corporations or very wealthy people used, and they went to actually being something that you could have in your own home. So sometimes with air, what we see is a technology moving into a mass production phase. And so 1981 to 2000, we did get a lot of, PCs became available in homes. We had that's when cell phones and mobile phones developed. They went from being these big bricks in the late 80s from like Wall Street brokers to all the way through to things that, obviously they've increased since 2000, but they've become smaller and faster. And we're just going to see more and more of that as we go. So part of, the way I'm going to invite you to think about this today, especially towards the end of our talk, when we're sort of thinking about interacting with this in our own chart, think about that 1981 to 2000 period. That's the air, that was the taste. And then 2000 to 2020 was sort of the earth. It's part of what we want to sort of move away from, because 2020 is like a reconnection. It's picking up of the themes that came out in that 1981 to 2000 period. I wanted to introduce this concept that also comes to the fore from sort of medieval astrology. Actually, this concept of the temperaments or the humors actually became very well known in the first or the previous air period. And in this system within astrology, we're actually looking at the elements and the planets as combinations of 4 core qualities. So the qualities are either heat or coldness. So something can either be hot or dry, and it can hot or cold, or it can either be dry or wet. Of course, they have to be opposite. So signs and planets were historically qualified according to whether they were a planet that triggered a heat or a heating activating response, or a cold and cooling slowing response. And planets and signs were also defined by whether they had a wet or a moist quality, which can speak to binding or togetherness, or whether they had a dry quality, which is a little bit more about separation and distance. So the qualities of air are heat and moisture, and the qualities of earth are sort of cold and dryness. So one of the qualities that I think has been collectively affecting us, with us being in this earth period, is this idea of having and holding, this idea of accumulating or stockpiling. That's a very earth thing. There's a melancholy quality to the earth element that has a little bit of either fear or concern for protection and having enough. And so there can be this tendency to accumulate or to hold on to things. And collectively in the last couple of 100 years, we've seen a lot of literally earth. We've seen mining, we've seen industrialization so that we can increase and improve production times. But we've also seen a little bit of that fear of scarcity and not having enough kind of drive collective consciousness. As we start to come into the air period, there's a warming up because we switch from a cold to a hot sign. And there's also a getting wetter because we're moving from a dry quality to a wet quality sign. And that's interesting because the way the signs work, you can switch from one sign to another where they share a quality. But in this instance, we're switching from one sign that's cold and dry to a sign that is hot and wet. And there's no quality in common. So that can feel a little bit more abrupt or disconnected, like, oh, it's nothing like what it used to be. And that's what we have to keep in mind as we contemplate life beyond December 2020. So the heat of air is activating and stimulating, and we're going to see movement, but we're not necessarily going to see movement of things, but rather movement of ideas or concepts. And moisture is about connectivity. So it's very much about finding ways to stay in touch or to stay, to interact. And so the idea of sharing and connecting, air is associated with the sanguine temperament, which is a little bit more upward looking, and it's definitely more forward looking. So there's some conceptual qualities here that we're going to be experiencing collectively. I think you'll also be experiencing this personally, and we're going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of the talk today, but at least to get you thinking, and in many ways, the reason I put this diagram together with the air on top of the earth Earth is our most dense element. So it has a base or a foundational quality. It's very much about security and, if you like, base chakra things. Whereas air is much more up. It's, more of the energy around our head and definitely outward going. So there is this rising up and moving out tone. So the other qualities that are connected to the elements, if you like, traditionally, are some of the ideas around the seasons. And this I also found a little bit inspiring in that the air element is connected to spring. So the idea here, we've got that beautiful crocus, one of the earliest flowers we see in the springtime, and I'm honoring the springtime with some freesias over here, which you can't actually smell, but they smell fantastic here for me. So the idea of air is moving into the springtime. So it can be an accelerated period of growth. Air represents the human intellect, and so inventions and ideas that are really logical or really rational or high thinking kind of concepts, and very much about looking to the future, because in the springtime we feel like we're coming alive. We feel like, oh, thank God we survived that winter, especially if you live in the cold northeastern parts of North America like I do, where we still had snow a couple of weeks ago. So it's looking to the future and that feeling of like, oh, we can grow or flourish again. The Earth period is associated with autumn. And you can see that represented in sort of the dry autumn leaves here. And this, I didn't take this picture in my garden, but my garden has a scene just like this right now, where there's some leaves that we didn't get up before the snow came, and now the crocuses are popping up. But the earth energy is very dry, and so it tends to separate. As we get into the autumn or the fall, we start thinking about hibernating or hoarding or preparing for the winter. There's a quieting or a settling down. And so symbolically, this period is about reaching back out into community, reaching back out into the environment, the area that you live, so that you're less isolated, which you may have been in the past. Okay, so just to set our little theme here, I wanted to put a couple of quick charts up just to show how we might see maybe an earth or an air emphasis in the birth chart. It's very, very simple. You can sort of just have a look and see, do you have a lot of earth in your chart? Do you have a lot of air in your chart? This is one way just to get you to start thinking about these big concepts of the Jupiter and Saturn earth to air shift. Different charts and different people are going to be better placed to take advantage of the air qualities that are coming through. And this is an example of a gentleman, Cornelius Vanderbilt. He's the Vanderbilt that started all the Vanderbilt sort of fortune. He's the first one. So this is a birth chart with no time. So just ignore the houses as you're looking at the chart here. His birth date is on record, which is why I've grabbed that for you today. Because even without a time, there are some things we do know for sure about his chart. We know that we have a Moon, Mercury, Saturn triple line up there in Taurus, an earth sign. And we also have Jupiter over here in Capricorn. Now, he's not without his air placements, which I think is really interesting, because he almost was someone who kind of straddled a little bit of air earth, if you like, in the sense that he made his fortune through railroads and shipping, which sound like air things because they're about moving around. But why was he developing railroads and shipping? To move stuff, to move physical things, whether that's resources like coal or whether that's products that were starting to be developed and need to move around. So the railroads and the shipping were there, they were on the land, on the water, to move physical objects around. So he was born prior to the Earth period beginning in the early 19th century, but came of age and made his fortune during that time. So one of the things I think we're going to see going forward is that the types of industries or things people are doing that are making, loads of money, if you like, are not going to be the traditional industries like industrial industries or producing goods, if you like. And we've already seen a little bit about that. We have had this crossover period. So since 1981, we've kind of been in transition between the old earth and the new air. And we have seen the increase of digital products and services. So yes, Amazon is huge and they made their money from shipping books around the world, but they've actually branched into digital download, where now you don't have to wait for the actual book to come. You can just download the PDF and get the ideas faster. We're going to see more and more of that as we go forward. Okay, so let's keep moving.
So Kelly, I think this might be a good time to share some of the great questions that have been coming in.
Perfect.
So Kent asks, the Earth being connected to pragmatism, empiricism, and materialism, and air with Platonism, math, idealism, and astrology. He says it's curious that there's a rise in astrology during this Jupiter, or during the Jupiter conjunct Saturn in air.
Yes, I do agree. I think astrology is just one wonderful example of how wisdom and ideas are going to spread around much more quickly. And I was so happy when I saw that we did have this revival of astrology in the West the last time we had the air. And I think there's a lot of research that we could do depending on if we had, you know, how much time we had. But the spread of ideas that happened in that sort of 12th and 13th century, and the shift from some of the older mindsets. Were there any other questions, Alex, that I should speak to now?
Yes. Kathy asked, what role do you feel community will play during this Earth to air shift?
An increasingly large one will be, I think we're going to see communities pop up that have specific intentions or goals in mind. So it's not just like, let's all being one sort of conglomerate. It's very much about, we want to get together to do this specific thing, or we all share passion for this idea or for this technology. So we're coming together to pursue, you know, the development of that. Because the air element is really going to speak to connectivity. And I think it'll be a combination between being connected in person and being connected online. And somebody's just made a comment about intentional communities, which I think is beautiful. And one example that comes to mind immediately, and in some ways this is straddling the earth and air, is in Australia, and I think in Canada, there are communities starting to pop up specifically for older women who don't have a partner or a family to live with as they age. And communities like these weird sort of complex houses are being built that allow, you know, you have your own room and your own sort of sitting area, but you might share common areas like kitchens or laundries, so that you can have your own space, but you can also have some companionship and support as you get older. And so that's just one example. This is sort of, and partly because, you know, one of the issues with women as they age is they tend not to have as much money put away, for things like retirement. So it helps to defray the cost by creating more of that combined or community living. And I think we will see more of that in terms of managing resources through community, if you like.
And one more curiosity from Meredith. She wonders if this will impact people with earth and air emphasis more than those with fire or water emphasis, or at least how they'll be impacted differently. What's your take on that, Kelly?
Yeah, I do think there is some truth in that if you are a strong air chart, and there are some very specific air placements that I'm going to speak to a little later in the talk today, which will have to be fairly quickly because we don't want to run enough time to do that. But I do think if you've got a lot of air in your chart, you're kind of more naturally or intrinsically aligned or in tune with the collective energy that's coming through. Now, keep in mind that we do all have all three air signs somewhere in our chart. And even if you don't have a lot of planets in the air signs, it may be that through the houses in your personal chart that have the air signs on the cusp, that you can sort of get those parts of your chart activated or do more around those topics. But to speak to the other elemental mix, the elements of air and fire have an affinity. They're both hot elements, so they tend to energize and activate. So if you're a fire dominant chart, I think you may find that you can partner fairly well with the air energy coming through collectively. If you're a water dominant chart, you may find that you've been a little bit more comfortable in some of this earth period, in that water and earth are both cool or colder. They tend to be a little bit more sort of private or introspective or more about the smaller community. But the water dominant chart tends to share the wet quality with the air. So there is this weird connection between water and air in that they both are interested in connection. Air usually on a larger scale or sort of more of that, broad, whereas water on a more intimate scale. But there is something there around connection, that they share.
So one more question here specifically on connecting from Mary Beth Kelly. She asks, is there a shadow side with some people living only online and eschewing in-person real-time connection?
I do think there is. I guess I have mixed feelings about that in the sense that there are some people that are incredibly shy and introspective, and connecting online is actually sort of the most comfortable way for them to do it. And if they had to go out in person, they'd have no connection at all. So I feel like I personally have a lot of compassion and understanding that things like online connections and online communities provide a link to community for people who would find it so hard to do in person. And then there is a portion of people that I think that hide behind, the computer, if you like. And we are social beings as humans, and we do benefit from in-person, real-life human interaction. So I think, as much as you can encourage that tends to be better, but just holding awareness that, for some people that's really uncomfortable. Cool. Okay, so let's keep going. Now, there's a couple of charts here that I just wanted to briefly mention around sort of air dominant charts. Now, this is a chart. Alan Turing was basically a computer science geek, mathematician, probably someone who was really ahead of his times. He was a code breaker in World War II, and there's been a movie made about his life called The Imitation Game. So if you're kind of curious as to who is this random scientist, mathematician person that we're talking about here, that's a great movie to have a little look at. And you can see that he would be a fairly classic air dominant chart. Air sign rising with a couple of planets in air in the first, and then a midheaven in another air sign right on, and then with Uranus, a modern planet, but very associated with the idea or the concepts of air and sky, right on the midheaven, plus a moon sign, his sect light, because he's born at nighttime, in another air sign. So we do get this real ideas concept. And he was coming up, he's on record at saying something like in the late 40s or early 50s that he could imagine a time where women would carry their computers with them when they walked in the park. And I was just like, he's so far, that was before we had PCs in our homes. It was way before anyone even had the idea of things like modern cell phones and mobile phones, which are basically small computers. So very much ahead of his time. And it'll be interesting to see if some of his work is reactivated post this December 2020 Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, because the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction will be occurring very early in Aquarius, right on his MC. So it's a tiny little bit of a sidebar that, our birth charts do continue to be activated after we've died. And so that'll be, something we can watch for, basically. So to just have a look at one more modern chart. Now, again, unfortunately, we don't have a birth time for Elon Musk, who I'm going to pop up. Yeah, Alan Turing, I mean, I don't want to gloss over the fact, I don't want you to think his life was perfect. He was a homosexual in Great Britain in the middle of the 20th century when it was illegal. And his death is still shrouded in secrecy today. Did he really commit suicide? Was he actually killed? He was punished for his sexuality and his sexual orientation, which is very, very sad. But he was this brilliant person that was breaking code, German code in World War II, and saved thousands and thousands of lives. So beautiful story to have a look at. I think Tony's referenced his chart because there's some out of bounds activity here as well, but we don't want to sidebar too much, which I could speak about Alan Turing's chart all day. Fascinating character, great chart. So Elon Musk, look, not necessarily everyone's cup of tea. Also no birth time here for him, but a lot of air placements. Now he's someone born in the early 1970s, so just prior to that first air conjunction in 1981. And we've got Uranus and Saturn both in air signs, Mars in the North Node along with Venus in air signs here. So you can sort of expect someone with an air sign dominant chart like this really well placed to kind of take off with their inventiveness or their ideas. We should already see some of that regardless of the collective, because if they're kind of living their truth, they're going to have that come through. But just to give a more modern example, so sort of watch that space for charts of people like Elon Musk as we go forward from here. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on the Saturn-Pluto piece, but the reason I want to mention it briefly is that it almost makes sense that we're having this big, potentially kind of death destroy configuration in an earth sign in the dying months of this longer 200-year earth elemental shift. So we've got Saturn, we've got Pluto, we've got the South Node, all moving through Capricorn at the moment. I know you've heard a lot about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction itself, so I don't really need to add a lot to that. I know you've had some great talks and you can get a lot of info on that. But the idea here with the South Node, which is, a traditional point, if you like, that has a lot to do with endings and depletion and being drained or letting go. And then Saturn and Pluto having to do with these ideas of death, destruction. I wrote recently on my blog about the idea that we've been renovating our kitchen. And when our contractor first came on board, he would say things like, the first step is we have to demolish what's there. And when I thought about getting a new kitchen that was shiny and updated, and I actually wanted an oven that worked like a modern oven, because we had this very vintage thing from like 1972, I didn't think about the word demolish or destruction as part of that process. I just thought about let's make something new. But this has been a really great lived real life example for me that if I want to make something new, I've got to destroy what's existing, because otherwise there's no space to make improvements. We had to fix some of the flooring because we live in a very old house, and there was no way to do that without completely ripping everything that was there out. And we have had this period of sort of 4 or 5 weeks where our kitchen has just been literally an empty room. There's been nothing in it as it was rebuilt from the ground up. And the first couple of weeks was just fixing the floor. So the reason I mentioned the Saturn-Pluto piece is that we must do some letting go, and collectively we need to have this out with the old sense of power structure or power dynamic, out with the old traditions and hierarchies that have really served us well in this last couple of 100 years in terms of creating wealth and creating security. And now when I say served us well, they've served some parts of the population well, and they've really marginalized other parts. But the key here and this image on the screen, which is after a bushfire comes through an Australian eucalyptus forest, you can see that all the low-lying shrub has been burned away. And what's left behind are these really solid trunks of trees, like the core or the essence. All the superfluous extra has to go. And as we prepare for this momentous change in December of 2020, we're all called to get rid of that superfluous extra stuff that is clogging up our energetic being, it's clogging up our schedules, it's interfering with our ability to focus our time on the things that really matter. And so the idea here, and this is a huge theme in 2019, because Saturn, Pluto, and the South Node are doing something very unusual in April of 2019. They're all in the same part of the sky together. And I looked back for more than 100 years and I could not find a time when Saturn, Pluto, and the South Node were all so close together at the same time. So I think that speaks to, I know we're really focused on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, but the South Node activation is, from a traditional astrology perspective, a huge part of why there is so much destabilization going on right now, because the rug has been pulled out. It needs to burn in the fire of purification, just like this eucalyptus forest did. One of the other images that keeps coming to my mind when I think about this juxtaposition between the collective earth period and the air period that we're shifting into is the devil card from the tarot. Now, I'm no tarot expert, so forgive me if I speak out of turn here, but my husband loves the tarot, like all good Scorpios. He's very into these types of things. But I keep thinking about the devil card, and it's a card that represents being bound, and it represents being bound by material attachment or feeling restricted or feeling like your choices are limited because you're very kind of grounded and anchored, but almost too much so. And the idea of this shift with Saturn, Pluto, and the South Node, which kind of represents the end of this 200-year elemental Earth period, is that we need to start thinking about why we're attached to the things that we are. Is money really all we make it out to be? Are owning houses and more cars and more things, is it really giving you what you think it would? Is it just that you're afraid of scarcity, or you've got this obsession with security and you think, perhaps falsely, that filling up on these practical, tangible levels is going to take away the fear or the emptiness? And to question where you might be bound without actually realizing it, because some of the dynamics with Saturn and Pluto and the South Node is speaking to this unconscious sense of being bound. The South Node also speaks to ancestry and historical lineage. And it is also important for us all between now and shifting into this air period to think about not just how you might be bound in your personal circumstances, but how your story ties into the binding that has happened within your family lineage, either through your matriarchal or your patriarchal line. Because one of the things that is an offer to all of us as this Saturn, South Node, Pluto activation, they're co-present in the same sign right up until early of 2020. We can break old patterns. And that doesn't mean that you can figure out how to stop eating a whole chocolate bar at once in terms of breaking an old pattern in your own life, although that's part of it. But I'm talking about those patterns that have existed from generation to generation in your family lineage, in your physical, biological DNA. When I studied my counseling training years ago, one of the things they make you do is a family genogram. And it's basically getting a big piece of Bristol board or cardboard, and you go back as far as you can and you write down the members of your family and the circumstances of their lives. And when you do that, you start to see patterns emerging that you might not have been aware when you just think about this aunt or that great uncle. So the idea of being aware what those patterns are is important before we can break them. And that's part of the work between now and the end of 2020. So that's, I know the devil is kind of, it's a tarot card, but the chains that bind you and the ways in which you might be being kept small by circumstance or even by choice, because your choices are being driven by this fear or scarcity mindset. So I think that's some thought-provoking info that we can take forward. You might also think, just to weave this into astrology, think about the Capricorn house in your chart and think about the house that has the planet Saturn in your chart. So you'll have probably 2 houses in the chart, and think about whether you feel that you have commitments that you choose with your whole heart that give you genuine stability, or whether you have made a deal with the devil, or whether you've made a trade-off that you sort of got really afraid about a topic to do with those houses and you've given up some of your choice because you think you have to stay put. So I think, whether whatever house you have Saturn in and whatever house you have Capricorn in, think about whether you're staying stuck there for reasons that maybe you've outgrown, and therefore we don't need to make those same choices going forward. So let's turn our attention now to Jupiter and Saturn in 2020. We need to look at this chart. Now, I've decided to honor one of my hometowns, Sydney, with this chart. So we're looking at December 21st, late in the evening, but it'll be earlier in the day if you're in North America. So in the morning, around lunchtime, if you're in, say, Toronto, New York, LA, Seattle, wherever you happen to be. If you're in Europe, it'll be December 22nd, 2020. You can see Jupiter and Saturn. That's what we mean. Their conjunction is happening. They're both together. They're 0 Aquarius. So one way to think about how personally you may or may not be affected by this is to think about, do you have any planets at 0 degrees Aquarius? Do you have your midheaven like Alan Turing? Or do you have your ascendant at 0 Aquarius? And if so, you may find that the events in your life are really tied into the collective story at that particular point of time. The other placements to think about in your natal chart are, do you have any planets in your natal chart at 0 degrees of the other fixed signs? So remembering that, nothing happens in isolation in our charts. And as much as 0 degrees Aquarius is where the hot activity is happening, we will have some activation by aspect to 0 Taurus, 0 Leo, and 0 Scorpio. So anybody who has a planet like their sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, or Mars, maybe your angles, the ascendant, the descendant, the midheaven, the IC, at 0 degrees of the fixed signs is going to be also drawn into the dynamics of this Jupiter-Saturn cycle. In terms of orbs, I might think about just a couple of degrees. I might go up to maybe 3 degrees Aquarius. The tighter the orb, the more potent the activation tends to be. We are going to see some generational activity. So there is going to be generations of people who have Uranus at 0 Leo or Uranus at 0 Scorpio. Generations of people that might have Pluto in early Scorpio or Pluto in early Leo that can be drawn in to this collective story. Somebody's made a comment here. They love how it's happening on the solstice. That is true. Now in North America, Northern Hemisphere, it'll be right on the winter solstice. And if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, like my friends in Australia, it will be the summer solstice. But either way, a solstice is a very potent turning point in and of itself. And I think it does mark this time as there's more energy and more juice coming through here. Now, there's something else that I thought about this before, but I was like, 0 Aquarius. How many of you work with fixed signs? Fixed stars, I should say, not fixed signs. We should all work with fixed signs. They're in the zodiac. But fixed stars. So one of my favorite fixed stars is actually at 1 degree Aquarius. And this fixed star is Altair, which is the alpha star in the constellation of Aquila, the eagle. I'm just grabbing some extra notes. So going to a different part of the presentation, I would like to say that I have truly honored the air element in terms of the amount of paper that is in my office right now with all my different notes to keep all the different stories and info I wanted to share with you today. So Aquila. Now let's talk a little bit about eagles. So first of all, Altair, this particular fixed star has been tracked by some of our oldest sources on fixed stars. So there's many, many fixed stars in the sky. They're known as fixed because they move much, much, much more slowly compared to the planets who were the wandering stars. And going back to the origins of astrology, there was a group of stars that have been studied sort of from the get-go, and then it's been added to as we go. But so this is one that's been in our astrological understanding of fixed stars for a really long time. Eagles have been associated with lightning, with fire, with sun gods. There's a real sense of power to the eagle. Now, I know the specific star is Altair, but whenever you're working with fixed stars, to understand the specific star, it is important to get a sense of the constellation. Now, Aquila the eagle is actually in a part of the sky where there are actually 2 or 3 birds. There's a sort of like a flock of birds in this one particular part of the sky, and Aquila the eagle is one of those birds. So we have straight away this idea of the birds of a feather flock together coming through. It's very specifically, I associate that concept with the sign of Aquarius, but very specifically with this early part of Aquarius that is activated by Altair. So if you have natal planets or placements around 1 degree Aquarius, you have had this fixed star influencing you throughout your life, even though you didn't know it. And the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and Altair is almost like a collective infusion of this star's energy. So it's more than just 0 Aquarius and the symbolism of the sign of Aquarius. It's actually bringing the energy of this fixed star in. Now, fixed stars are many, many, many times more powerful than the planets themselves, which is why they're so potent when they show up in the sky. And one of our earliest writers on fixed stars, which is just Anonymous 379, because we have no name, so that's what they go by, he noticed that sometimes a person's life would transcend the potential in the birth chart. And he started to notice that that happened when some of these very bright first magnitude fixed stars were active in the birth chart. So Altair is at 1 Aquarius. So I think if you've got anything between 0 and 4 Aquarius, it would be picking up the energy of Altair. So there's a lot of power. It's a fixed star associated with the planets Mars and Jupiter. So there's growth, but there's also this determination, if you like. Eagles were about they symbolized calling down fire and power from the heavens. So this is a way of like calling down wisdom, if you like, or insight. This particular star has a connection of that boldness and action, but it was also connected to some very Aquarius things around human relationships and caring, that idea of community. So one person's chart that I always think about when I'm teaching on Altair or thinking about it is the musician John Lennon. And he has, here we go. So he has his natal moon, which is his sect light, because he's born at nighttime at 3 Aquarius. So that's close enough, I would say, to be picking up this energy of Altair. And he was not just an incredibly talented musician, but he was also, it was almost like his music was used as a protest for human rights and human justice, which are all very Altair-y type things. I always think of Altair as being very aspirational, about people with Altair in their charts and in their lives, and certainly this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on this star. It's about reminding us of the potential, of that highest sense of what we can strive for. It may fall short in reality, but we're striving and aiming for that pure vision and that sort of clear, rational, logical, this is what it could be. And the lyrics that John Lennon wrote that I always think of with this star is the lyrics to the song Imagine. So that idea of, you know, imagine all the people, imagine us living all as one, living day by day. Now, this is a man who died in bloodshed, so it's not necessarily all happy and sunshine. And we do have that Mars quality associated with this star. But in some ways, it's almost like being willing to die for what you believe in, having such conviction of your ideas and your beliefs that you will pursue them doggedly, you know, at any cost. So the story of the star of Altair is tied in to this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I don't necessarily think it's going to be significant for the whole 200-year cycle, but I think it's very much a part of the next 20 years, the December 2020 to December, well, let's see exactly. I'm not going to speak out of turn here. We've got enough research, as I said. So December 2020 until October of 2040. There'll be another conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn in October of 2040. That one will still be in air, so still carrying these themes, but that one's at 17 Libra. So that's going to pick up a few different specific themes for that 20-year period. So one way to think about this is that the December 2020 period is two things at once. It is the start of the 200-year air elemental period, and it's also the start of a new 20-year chapter. And this theme of Altair is very specific to that 20-year chapter. So it's the idea of pulling some wisdom from the sky. So how can we do that collectively? Yes, there's going to be a lot of movement. It's a bird constellation. So we have that idea of reiterating the qualities of air, of free movement, if you like. Loose borders, birds don't have any idea where a country's border is. They just go. So that can be great in terms of the free movement of people or goods, but it can be bad if people object to having that free movement. So that's something to keep in mind there as well. So I do love, I mean, John Lennon's chart's exceptional for many reasons. Now, Alan Turing, just to very briefly revisit that, we did talk about his midheaven on that Altair star. And so he channeled that energy, pulling wisdom down from the sky. He had ideas and visions and concepts that people just were like, they knew he was a genius in his own lifetime. Unfortunately, he didn't, get the personal respect, and that did cramp his professional style, if you like. So a few tips on how you might bring all of these big conceptual ideas into your chart, which is where we're all living day by day. So the transition here is that the last 20 years from 2000 to 2000, the last 20 years, 2000 to 2020, the parts of your chart that are influenced by earth signs and planets, so the part of your chart that has Taurus on the cusp and Virgo and Capricorn, you've perhaps been able to really have some substantial growth or success in those parts of your life because they were where the parts of your chart were connecting to the collective. Now, to be really clear, if you're coming to this from a more modern background, I am not talking about the 2nd, 6th, and 10th houses, unless explicitly in your chart you happen to have Taurus on the 2nd house cusp or Taurus on the 6th house cusp. So I do want you to be really personal and see, oh, I've got Taurus on the 3rd house cusp, so it's through 3rd house topics for me. Or maybe you have Virgo on the 9th house cusp, and then it's through some of those topics. And also where the house you've had Saturn. It's in some ways a way to conceptualize this at a really individual level is the last 20 years have really encouraged us to do our Saturn stuff, to try and build or accumulate or protect around the topics of the house where we have Saturn in our chart. But going forward, as we said, we're leaving the earth behind. So we need to start to shift our focus towards the air. And so the idea here is that start to look in your chart and see where you personally have Gemini on the cusp or Libra on the cusp or Aquarius on the cusp. That's how those signs personally interact with your chart. So we're not trying to do that general ABC, Aries, 1st house, Mars. We're trying to be more explicit and let your chart tell us the topics that are associated with the air signs for you personally. So Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, look for the houses that you have those signs on the cusp of in your chart and think about how you could get more involved in manifesting topics of those house areas in your life or improving them. And then the main planet associated with the air element is actually Jupiter, because Jupiter shares these heat and moist qualities. And so there's almost a collective cosmic encouragement to move into the house and the topics of Jupiter in your personal chart. Jupiter doesn't have to be in an air sign for you to get this going. It's just saying that the qualities of Jupiter are connected to the air shift that we're coming into, which kind of encourages all of us, or gives us all a little bit of a chance to get more Jupiter in our lives. Now, a couple of other planets that would be like secondary air planets, you could pull in Venus or Mercury. Venus and Mercury can be a little changeable, so they're not pure air planets, but they can support what's happening with Jupiter and the air influences in your chart. So if you happen to have Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius on an angular house, so maybe you've got a Gemini ascendant, Libra midheaven, maybe Aquarius 7th house, you're going to be able to be really tuned into. That's going to be quite stimulating for you in terms of this next period. So just to have a think about that. And the summary point I was just sort of making is that 1981 to 2000 was an air period. And in some ways, if you think back, you may have been able to do a little bit more of your Jupiter stuff in that time. And then it got shifted to the Earth period, 2000 to 2020, where we had to do a little bit more on our Saturn. And now we're shifting back to the Jupiter period. So the idea here is that, you know, I was like, this is fun to talk about. Everybody wants more Jupiter, basically. So wherever Jupiter is in your chart, the sign, the house, the aspects, that can be something that you really want to focus on as part of this air shift. So just to bring that into a really personal sphere. Now, I think there's a slide here I just want to skip over. I might speak to this very quickly because we have a minute. This is not a comprehensive summary. It's just a very brief clue in that we do have some generations. Now, I've only gone back the last sort of 40 years, but of course we could go back through the entire 20th century. There are some generations that are very heavy on air placements in terms of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Those generational groups are likely to be really stimulated. We're going to see individuals from these generational periods really step into the fore once we come into this December 2020 air period. So we've got the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto in Libra. late 1980, most of 1981. The period here, 1997 was pretty interesting because we had Jupiter and Uranus in Aquarius, so people born then. I know they're relatively young, but we're going to start to see particularly specific individuals just bursting out of those generations. The Saturn in Gemini period, August 2000 to June 2003, we also had Uranus in Aquarius then. For part of that time, we also had Jupiter in Gemini and we had Neptune in Aquarius. There's a lot of periods there where we've had heavy air emphasis. You can also think about collective events in those times to get more of a feel for how the air element can manifest collectively. You can go earlier than 1980. I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot here. So looking forward, 0 Aquarius is the hotspot degree with this transition cycle of Jupiter and Saturn. So at a very personal level, just think about the house that holds 0 Aquarius for you. And the summary statement that I wanted to offer you today is that your efforts, Saturn, in that part of your chart or around those topics can help you offer a gift, Jupiter, to the collective. And that can be part of your contribution for this next 20 years. So we're all going to get a chance to really get to know our Aquarius sector. And this way you can sort of be really productive with it. And to really help you lift your gaze, you know, the shift here is really from the ground, earth, to the sky, which is air. So collectively, it's time to look up and out, to stop bean counting or, you know, Scrooge with all his gold coins. That's very sort of down here, and we go up and out. To move, to roam far and wide, to connect rather than just accumulate. You know, if you have a choice between buying something or spending time with someone, going forward, it's very much about spending time with someone. If you have a choice between earning money and developing a relationship, do the relationship thing. That's some of the ways you can be really practical or just bring these concepts into your everyday choices. And most importantly, I wanted to encourage you to follow the call of your curiosity. The only way that we get inventions and new developments is because somebody just started to wonder, what if? Or could that happen? So don't be limited by the restrictions. Oh, we've never done it like that, so I won't worry about it. If your mind can get there, reality can get there. So be one of those people that lets the mind lead us all forward. So thank you so much. We've covered so much today. I hope you've got inspired for the future, and we'll take some questions now. Thanks, Alex.
Yes, Kelly. Okay, so the question that has come up a couple times has been, how do you work with out of sign aspects? For instance, Nathan has his midheaven at 29 degrees Pisces, so he's curious if that sextile will still count.
Right. Okay. So I'm not a huge fan of out of sign aspects. There's a couple of exceptions to that rule, but the reason for that is one of the driving principles about how aspects work has to do with the qualities of the signs that the different planets are in. So Aquarius is that hot, kind of moist, activating sign. It has a lot in common with a fire sign, and air feeds fire. So if the midheaven was in early Aries, there's a real affinity or kind of friendliness between the qualities of Aries and the qualities of Aquarius. So technically by degree, there's still a little bit of that sextile vibration, but I don't tend to see out of sign aspects to be as strong or as powerful because, you know, something in Pisces is got a real different sense of orientation to something in Aquarius.
And can you say something real quick here before we wrap up about the trines and the sextiles? That's been a question that's come up a few times as well. Just paying attention to those activating.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we kind of obsess over squares and oppositions, don't we? But you can absolutely, if you've got planets in early air signs, you will get the gift of this Jupiter Saturn. And if you've got planets in early Aries or Leo, Sag. Sorry, I'm like going too many signs. Yeah, I do think you'll still get the benefit. It tends to be a little more subtle. It doesn't hit you over the head in the way the squares and oppositions do. But you will definitely, if you've got a planet at 0, 1, or 2 degrees of an air or fire sign, you will definitely notice this conjunction at the end of next year.
Okay. Well, Kelly, I don't know if you have time to hang out for a few minutes after we stop our recording.
I do.
Oh, you do? Wonderful. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy life to be here with us all today live. That's a wonderful treat for all of us. And I want to thank all the attendees that are here watching live from home or, I don't know, in your car or wherever you are. And I want to remind you all that in 1 hour, Grace Morris will be here with us. You definitely don't want to miss what she has to say about the 2020 stock market, real estate, and business cycles. So tune in for that in just about an hour, 5 p.m. Pacific time. So thank you so much, Kelly, for being here with us today and sharing your insights.
Thanks so much, Alex, and thanks to everyone for watching. It was a pleasure.
All right. Well, we are still live streaming, Kelly. And I thought now would be a good time to just touch on some of the questions that are a little broader than just your topic. We'll see if these are ones you want to touch on. So Sarah asks, Jupiter and Saturn in conjunction will be square Uranus and Taurus. How will this affect us?
Great question. Yes, Jupiter and Saturn will be square. Yeah, I'm really excited about Uranus and Taurus just for many, many reasons, basically. So I think that one thing that we forget about Saturn by transit is that Saturn helps concretize or make things real. And Jupiter in Aquarius, Uranus in Taurus, there's a lot of ideas and shakeup going on. So I think that the visionary component of Jupiter Uranus, which has been connected to breakthroughs in development historically, and Richard Tarnas's book, Cosmos and Psyche, is wonderful to explore more of that. But I do think the Saturn, it helps kind of filter some of those big ideas into practical applications. So I'm quite excited to see what that can bring. And that'll really bring us into 2021 when Jupiter and Saturn get far enough up to directly activate Uranus.
Oh, right. Thank you for that, Kelly. Let's see. There's a question that says that you mentioned 0 degree Aquarius on all the angles but the descendant. So what about on the descendant with this conjunction?
So equally important, that would have just been a slip of my enthusiastic tongue mid-speech. So 0 Aquarius on the descendant, this is going to be about shifting focus in relationships. So coming into sort of this new vision, this new experience around how you relate to other people, both at work and also, of course, in your personal life.
Okay, wonderful. Well, if any of you have any questions here that you want to pop into the chat window real quick before we part ways for the next hour at least.
Yeah, you guys are, how's the day been going, Alex? I guess it's been a really
so wonderful.
Day.
So much
yeah,
fun.
And I'm sure this is not the first lecture for everyone either. So
yeah, it's like a whole astrology conference right here happening,
it's
real
amazing.
time wherever we are.
And you can still sleep in your own bed tonight, basically, yes. Which is like so good because that never happens.
Yes. And Kelly, you use whole sign, is that correct?
I do, yes, I do use whole sign. So you obviously, the main points, the main things that get affected by a conjunction like this are the angles and the planets. So they'll be consistent from different house systems. But yes, personally, I do use the whole sign. Like you, Alex.
Yeah. And do you have any insights that you can share a little bit more about Aquarius in the 9th house and how this will trigger?
Yeah, Aquarius in the 9th house. I mean, I've just had some students in my career astrology class looking at Alan Turing's chart. So I feel very connected to Aquarius 9th house. So this is, Aquarius 9th house is incredibly visionary. The 9th house, remember, is the house of wisdom. It's the house where knowledge from above comes into your being or into the world. And so Aquarius 9th house is very cutting edge. It's very innovative. It's very groundbreaking. And I think for all of us, I suspect that Jupiter and Saturn in our Aquarius house is a chance to really do something about an idea or a vision that's kind of been sitting in your soul for a really long time. So 9th house might be you've always wanted to write something or teach something or travel somewhere. And this would be like, put your money where your mouth is and go for it.
Oh, right. And do you have any insight about this conjunction if it's occurring for someone to their north node?
To the north node. Yeah, I think that, so I have this little phrase that I came up with years ago where when the north node is activated, it represents a time to kind of externally realign the expression of your life with these internal intentions that really are deep and meaningful for you. So this can be a time of course correction. It can be a time of like getting back onto this idea of true north for you. It's almost like committing to what really matters and being willing to step away from what's comfortable and familiar so that you can get to where you really want to go.
We have a question here, Kelly, that I think is really important to touch on.
Yeah.
While we don't have time to go through and do individual charts together today, someone did ask that. They said, I have a sibling with Saturn, Jupiter, natal conjunction in the 12th and an Aquarius sun in the 4th. And they say, I'm trying not to be worried, which is why I want to share this question right now.
Yeah.
They asked, would you have any words of wisdom regarding this?
For sure. So I'm guessing the sibling was born in that 2000 period with Jupiter and Saturn in Taurus. So yeah, I mean, I'm like, I feel very relieved here. I'm like, oh, I don't even need to pretend. The Jupiter Saturn stuff is coming into the 4th house for this sibling of yours. And if they have the sun in Aquarius square Jupiter and Saturn natally, there's a huge part of their life story that's tied up with finding the confidence and the courage to really express their true selves. That's a huge part of any strong Sun-Saturn aspect. And I suspect that with Jupiter and Saturn coming onto the sun, there is a real sense of, I can keep myself down to please others, or I can dare to break through and show a little bit of my true colors and see how life really lifts me up. So that's kind of how I would go with that. I know it can seem scary when there's things in the 12th house, but yeah, I can see some productive uses for that, basically, for their own, developing their own sense of identity and the confidence to express it.
And then maybe one more question here.
Yes. Okay.
I keep extending that.
I love it.
But really, this is it. So Sam asks, any thoughts on this conjunction on a natal Saturn in Aquarius? So, you're having a Saturn return.
Oh, right. Yeah. So, oh my God. Okay. One question that I might want to answer for 20 minutes. So let me try and make this succinct. I do think, and I teach this in my combining transits and progressions class, which is on Astrology University. I do think that anything else you have going on at the time you have a Saturn return flavors and changes how the Saturn return happens. So yeah, for those of you who are born with Saturn in early Aquarius and you're getting your Saturn return at this very, very special time, it adds an uplifting quality because you've got Jupiter co-present with Saturn. So you may get a little less of the doom and gloom. You may get a sense of, this is hard, but I've got that belief of Jupiter and I have to push through it. The Saturn return requires some effort and some adjustments, and it is about consolidating. It is about saying no to things that aren't authentic for you. So I do think it's very much about owning your wild, weird, wicked, wonderful ways and kind of having the backbone, which is part of what you develop in your Saturn return, to just put that out there. So, but having Jupiter co-present with your Saturn return, especially in a sign like Aquarius, where look, Jupiter doesn't have any special dignity, but Jupiter has a comfort being in an air sign because he shares the qualities of air. So I'm like, I'd rather have that for my Saturn return than have a Saturn return without Jupiter there. That's for sure.
Oh, that's beautiful, Kelly. Kelly, thank you again so much for being with us today. If you're interested in following Kelly's schedule or perhaps getting a consultation with her, you can find her on her website, which is kellysastrology.com. And that is spelled KELLYS astrology.com. So thanks again for being with us here today, Kelly. And for all you out there that are still engaged with us here, you have access to Kelly's time shared with us. I'm forgetting the words now.
Yeah, I love it. You've been talking a lot today, Allie.
This thing that just happened is available for 24 hours for free.
Fantastic.
And after that, it is available using the All Access Pass, which you can get for $97 through the end of Sunday evening. And then after that, it's $125 thereafter. So thank you so much, Kelly, and happy to have you here with us. And thank you to all of those out in cyberspace.
Thank you so much, Alex. And thanks everyone for coming. See you all next time.